There is a saying, no matter how important something is, it only becomes important when you need to use it.
Gold bars are very important, but if you're walking in the desert and about to die of thirst, the heavier the gold bars, the heavier your burden. You might carry them on you, very important, but they only become important when you need to use them, not when you're standing still and clenching your muscles tightly. Because you didn't choose the right strategy at the appropriate time. The common problem with coaches nowadays is getting stuck when changing strategies and then having to climb back up. Patients today are the same way. The longer you sit, you're using your pelvis to support yourself, specifically the sit bones, so the feet degenerate the fastest. So many members with knee pain, hip pain, and back pain are basically stuck when it comes to changing strategies. The pain doesn't necessarily appear immediately because the compensatory ability is very strong. But if your ankle isn't functioning well and your hip takes over, and then your hip's compensatory ability also fails, that's when the pain occurs. So at this point, what I'm telling everyone is that to explain the mysteries of these underlying logics, you need to first understand the structure between them and how the brain formulates strategies. You need to clarify these things, so understanding the structure is necessary to deconstruct it. Then we'll quickly talk about the glutes. If you want to tone your glutes, make them bigger, more attractive, and functional, you need to understand them. Let's take a look at the muscles of the glutes. What do I need to tell you here? The gluteus maximus is divided into the upper and lower parts. Then, the upper part accounts for about 1/3, and the lower part accounts for about 2/3. This means the lower part is at least 2 to 3 times larger than the upper part. You can understand it this way. So it looks like one muscle, but in reality, the gluteus maximus is divided into the upper and lower parts of the thigh, the upper part of the gluteus maximus, and the lower part of the gluteus maximus, separated in this way. This is male and this is female. For females, this large section is the lower part of the gluteus maximus, and this small section is the upper part of the gluteus maximus, which is the same for both males and females. And this female has not undergone training. If she had, her lower part of the gluteus maximus would be larger and thicker. Then, what does strong glutes, weak opponent mean? As I mentioned outside, the stronger the gluteus maximus, the weaker the pelvic floor muscles, because the large area of the lower part of the gluteus maximus grows entirely on the side of the bottom, while this small part of the upper gluteus maximus grows above the lower abdomen. In other words, because the area of the lower part of the gluteus maximus is larger, the more developed lower part of the gluteus maximus has more muscle mass. However, when the lower part of the gluteus maximus is developed, you excessively activate the hip strategy. This means that as long as you are standing, the two lower parts of the gluteus maximus tighten. Once they tighten, they hold the bottom in place, and as long as the bottom is held, there is no displacement between the bottom, the ischium, the pubic bone, and the ilium. Because it holds you in place and doesn't let you move, it's too long. During the process of breathing, it's actually about the changes in the space between the sacrum, coccyx, pubic bone, ilium, and ischium. Only when there is change, there is expansion, and thus breathing occurs. However, if the lower fibers of your gluteus maximus are too strong, and you activate the hip strategy, it means that the more developed your lower gluteus maximus is, the weaker your ankle side becomes. When you stand, your pelvic floor muscles lose their breathing function, hence the saying, strong glutes, weak opponent. This is a true depiction of the majority of female trainers with peach-shaped glutes nowadays. If you don't believe it, measure your blood oxygen level while standing, check your resting heart rate while standing, and take an image to see the position of your diaphragm when you're standing, as long as the lower fibers of your gluteus maximus increase. But what is its benefit? The benefit is that your sacrum is very stable, because you can think of it as the strongest and most powerful muscle that holds the sacrum in place, preventing it from tilting forward, which is the lower fibers of the gluteus maximus. Alright, now look at this image. This is a nearly horizontal base, with only the sacrum nodding and the coccyx often jumping, which is also called a horizontal base. And this is the lower fibers of the gluteus maximus. The lower fibers of the gluteus maximus are responsible for tightening and holding it, preventing it from tilting forward. It prevents it from tilting forward because it is also attached to the side of the sacrum, which is the function of the gluteus maximus. So the function of the lower fibers of the gluteus maximus is not bad, because if the sacrum is stuck in a supine position, stuck in a horizontal base, you can easily experience back pain. When you stand, it's easy to have back pain because your waist will increase and the compression behind your joints will be severe. So it's not bad, but it should hold it when it's supposed to. This is why you don't use the hip strategy when standing. Because as soon as you use the hip strategy, it means the displacement of your body has increased, and it means your respiratory muscles have to become stabilizing muscles. So when you activate the hip strategy, you can't use the pelvic floor muscles to breathe, because when you activate the hip strategy, your gluteus maximus has to firmly hold your sacrum. Once your sacrum is stabilized, your lumbar spine will be stable. And once the lumbar spine is stable, the thoracic spine will be stable. And once the thoracic spine is stable, the cervical spine will be stable. This is the biggest difference between the hip strategy and the ankle strategy. In other words, during the hip strategy, the pelvic floor muscles shouldn't be used for breathing. You know? Because during the hip strategy, the glutes need to tighten to hold the sacrum. If it's constantly moving, how can it be stable? Half of your body will go beyond the center line. You're about to fall, about to trip. That's why during standing and during single leg support, you use the ankle side for support. Because only by using the hip strategy to guide the lower bundle of your gluteus maximus can it relax. And when it relaxes, your nasal bone can nod and tilt back. When your nasal bone nods and tilts back, your gluteus medius can extend upwards, allowing you to have the exhalation function, enabling your diaphragm to push upwards and the air in your lungs to be expelled, thus saying goodbye to a stagnant state. This is their underlying logic. So when I mention this, you must not think of the lower bundle of the gluteus maximus as a villain, because this phrase, called the cornerstone, or the mainstay, refers to the base bone, which is the foundation of the entire spine. Therefore, a term was created called mainstay, which means the base comes first, and the pillar follows, representing that the base is the foundation of the pillar. So what am I trying to say? You just saw that clip. If the base bone nods and the tailbone tilts up and gets stuck in this position, it means the foundation of the entire spine has shifted. If the foundation of the entire spine has shifted, it means the spine has become a skyscraper without a foundation, which could collapse at any moment. It means the entire spine is unstable, and when the entire spine is unstable, your diaphragm cannot properly attach to the spine. So, at this point, your diaphragm has to protect itself. It first needs to find a way to stabilize because it is the primary structure maintaining the stability of the heart. So at this time, your diaphragm will definitely sacrifice its breathing function to become a stabilizing muscle. It must contract downward, pushing the ribs down, which in turn pushes the pelvic floor muscles down. Therefore, in this situation, training the lower fibers of the gluteus maximus is actually the fastest way to improve the position of the diaphragm. For example, at this time, the lower fibers of the gluteus maximus become expiratory muscles. When they tighten, they pull your sacrum back, stabilizing your spine. As a result, your diaphragm no longer needs to maintain stability, so its breathing function is restored. It doesn't need to maintain stability, it doesn't need to contract so intensely, it doesn't need to sink so low. It rises a bit, and as it rises, the pressure on the pelvic floor muscles decreases, allowing them to possibly activate. Therefore, at any time, each of us experiences changes in roles, meaning you play different roles in different situations. The lower bundle of the gluteus maximus is the quickest key to improving breathing for those with a tilted sacrum or an upturned coccyx. Training the diaphragm or the pelvic floor muscles is ineffective, and the results are poor. Training the lower bundle of the gluteus maximus will make them feel refreshed the fastest because you have restored the foundation of their entire spine, reinstating the pivotal role of the sacrum. That's how the term pillar of strength was created. There's a spine above the sacrum and the spine is in the middle, with energy flowing through it, hence it's called the pillar of strength. In a company, the pillar of strength also refers to senior management, symbolizing the core force driving the company forward, representing an indispensable position. Therefore, the responsibility of the lower bundle of the gluteus maximus is very significant.